and welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maupe Ogun Yusuf, and it's great to be back indeed. But I must thank my colleague Kayla Megwa, who graciously sat in while I was away. I have no doubt that she was great company. Well, I have come back to quite a plethora of issues, ranging from the floods in Maiduguri and its attendant consequences for the residents and its implications on food production for the rest of the country, to the now wrapping up United Nations General Assembly and also the recently concluded Edo elections. Let's not get into the controversy raging on in the Nigerian Correctional Service. It's quite a lot to take in all at once, so we'll take it one issue at a time. Let's focus on the Edo elections. A winner has finally been declared. Mr. Monday Okpebolo of the APC was returned winner with a little over 290,000 votes. He was followed very closely in the race by Mr. Aswe Godalo of the People's Democratic Party with about 247,000 votes, while the Labour Party candidate, Mr. Olumide Akpata, came a distant third with 22,000 plus votes. Now, while there will be congratulations and analysis to go all around, the process which produced the results will always be at the bottom of it. And for civil societies who monitored the process, they haven't been silent on the observations. For one of them, Yaga Africa, they have categorically said that the Edo governorship elections failed the integrity test. Tonight, I speak with Mr. Samson Itodo, the executive director of the group, on what this means, its implications for our elections and democracy going forward, and what can be done to remedy it. Samson, thank you so much for coming on Hard Copy.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to say that this latest statement of yours on the Edo elections, it means no words. And it's like one of the strongest statements I have seen so far released by Yaga on our elections. Is there any reason why you decided, your organization decided to be so upfront about it?
Well, I don't think it's the strongest statement. We've released a couple of the statements because, as you know, we deployed the process results verification for transparency, PVT, formerly PRVT, formerly known as PVT. We've deployed these for 17 governorship elections, off-cycle elections, and also 2 presidential elections. And there are times where we've declined verifying outcomes of elections because they don't meet the integrity test. So this is not the first time that this is happening. So there are times where they verify, and we've issued very strong statements. Even in the general elections, we also issued very strong statements. So it's not particularly. But I think because this election generated a lot of interest, but it's also the fact that the build-up to the election, you know, there was lots of concerns expressed with respect to the environment of the election. But more importantly, there were other contextual issues because the election was more of a clash of personalities and not necessarily about issues or sort of issue-based politics. But then we've gone to the election, and there were 3 tests that, you know, we sort of underpinned this election. You know, it's the first off-cycle election in 2024. And so we were looking at the resilience test. And the resilience test was that, yes, you had rainfall, adverse weather condition. You had issues relating to the early warning signs of violence because that election, there were lots of concerns. There was pre-election violence because we deployed long-term observers before September. We deployed long-term observers 4 months earlier, and they were all in the local government monitoring campaigns. And we saw how campaigns were fraught with all forms of attacks, you know, on political opponents. And that's why we're concerned, to the extent that, you know, one of the parties declined signing the peace accord, which raised a lot of questions, which we said that it was a missed opportunity to not have signed the peace accord. But then on the day of election, there was still low turnout of voters. And we thought that the test for the people of Edo was whether they were going to show up in the face of this early warning signs of violence. But only 22.4% of people showed up to cast their vote, which is lower than the 27% recorded in 2020. But for those 600,000 people who showed up, we must commend them for the resilience, that they demonstrated, that despite the logistical challenge in some polling units, as well as the rainfall, they waited patiently. And we say in that statement that all those who showed up to cast their vote had the opportunity, to cast their vote, so long as they were on the queue at 2:30 p.m. The other test was the impartiality test. There were lots of concerns about the deployment for the election. You had over 45,000 security personnel. There were concerns about federal might to influence the outcome, of the election. And so we wanted to see how the security agencies were going to deploy and to what extent will they interfere with the process. We speak about a peaceful elections in Edo because of the intervention of security agencies. So in the statement and the final report, we commended the security agencies because a peaceful environment to a large extent was attributed to the professionalism that they displayed. However, when you look, we observed uneven deployment of security agents. So you go to densely populated polling units, you still see one or two security personnel, which raises concern about, the nature of the deployment. There were also, but very isolated cases where, observers were prevented either from accessing polling units or they were subjected to all forms of search. If you also check the collation, and I must commend the police, because 24 hours before the election, the moment the materials left CBN left CBN on Friday the 20th to Oredo local government, there were thugs who were going to disrupt, who were interfering with the sort of logistical deployment. But it took the intervention of the security agencies to actually quell that. So to a large extent, we attribute, this peaceful environment to the role that they played. But then there were also concerns around the collation process, where there was disruption that led to either shift of location for the collation. The third critical test was the integrity test. And for us, there were 5 questions. The first was whether materials were going to be deployed in a timely manner, so elections can start. There were logistical issues because based on Yaga Africa's methodology, we sampled polling units, and based on the sample, accreditation and voting started at 8:30 in 17% of polling units. It moved to 64% by 9:30 a.m. And by 10 and 10:30 a.m., in virtually 90% of polling units, accreditation are commenced. The process of accreditation, voting, recording of results complied with the procedure laid down. So in terms of the process for this election, compared to the previous election, there was actually an improvement. The fundamental challenge came with the collation process, which was the weakest link. And that's why we have said in our report that, it fails to meet the integrity test because of the way the collation process was managed, and there were alterations, on the results. And that's our duty, as observers, to see, observe, and then report. In fact, in Ikpoba, to be very specific, our collation center observer, reported cases where they were tear-gassed, and then they were asked to leave the collation centers, and that the collation was going to happen in the INEC state office. And these are some of the issues because when you check, the distribution, once results fall outside of our margin of error, it suggests that some altering or manipulation have occurred. And that's what we highlighted in our report. And we did say that by virtue of this, as election observers, we've reported what we've seen, and that's why we said it failed the integrity test. And
you reiterate that. When I said that, I said it's one of your strongest statements, released yet.
Okay.
And on how many occasions, if you can remember, because I know you've monitored by now hundreds of elections. Have you had cause to say that an election has failed an integrity test?
We did that in the Osun 2018 election.
Yes, how often have you had to say that? If you're to look at how many statements and how many elections you've monitored, would you say it's up to 10% of the polls in Nigeria?
No, so we've been, in terms of deploying the methodology, there are different forms of observation. Now, this particular
deploying the methodology in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, we've done this for 16 off-cycle elections since 2016.
And how many of them have you had cause to say?
There are 3 of them. Actually, there are 4 of those elections. One, 2018 Osun. If you recall, the first Osun election, before it was declared inconclusive, we didn't verify the outcome. The second, the supplementary election, we didn't verify the outcome because of the violence, because of the interference with the collation process. So that's one. If you check the Bayelsa election, we didn't also verify that because in 26% of polling units, elections did not hold, but results, were declared. In
2023?
No, not 2023. The Bayelsa 2019 elections, we didn't. The Kogi 2019 elections, we didn't verify the outcome because of the level of violence and the manipulation. And it was the outcry of civil society and citizens that gave birth to the amendment in Section 24 of the Electoral Act about what's the consequential action when election had been disrupted in the course of election day conduct.
So this is not a statement you use very often. You use it when you see that something went really, really wrong.
Oh, yes, because we also verify outcomes. And we've done that, in the past. And there are times, and for people who are criticizing, this statement, they are the same people who relied on the PVT findings when we verify the outcomes. And it's the same methodology, nothing has changed. But like we said at Yaga Africa, we are driven by data, we are for all Nigerians, and we are beholden to none. Data does not lie. We have it a duty, it's a commitment that we have made to the Nigerian people. And if the data tells us, processes have not been compromised, we have been bold, to come out and say, this is it. We did that in the general elections in 2023. When the results fell within our margin, it's there in our report that they are consistent. So we understand that elections are an emotional issue. But then, as election observers, all we did was simply discharge our duty.
So the APC is saying that your methodology is questionable in this Itodo elections and saying you're not INEC. It doesn't bother you.
It doesn't, because we're not INEC. We don't have the power to declare. In fact, the reason why Yaga Africa waits for INEC to officially declare results before it releases its final findings, it's because of our recognition of the provisions of the law. It's not in our place, and we don't declare, because if there's one institution, that respects the law and understands the processes, is Yaga Africa. So we understand the sentiments, and again, we understand. We've simply just performed our role and function, but we're not in any way bothered by some of the responses that we've received.
Let's move on to the issue which you have raised, which is the issue of collation. It continues to appear to be a consistent weak link. It's the reason why INEC introduced the IREV portal. I mean, I'm moving from beavers and saying, citizens, you too can monitor this thing with us. I mean, you can monitor what's going on polling unit by polling unit. IREV failed in the 2023 elections, raising serious integrity issues for INEC in that election. But this time around, we understand that the IREV worked. So what precisely went wrong with the issue of collation? Where are we getting it wrong with collation?
I think that there are two issues here. Are we dealing with a technical problem, or we're dealing with a political problem? Or we're trying to solve a political problem with a technical problem? And I say that in terms of the laid down procedure, the technical component of results management, I think to a large extent we have all the systems that will guarantee, transparent processes. You may have, capacity deficits, and that's why you have little computational inaccuracies here and there. But the big question is about the political interference with the operations of INEC. And we've said this over time, that when you have a captured institution, all of these concerns about, results collation, they are all symptoms, they are manifestation of a fundamental problem. And that is the fact that the political actors come to elections as a do or die affair. And they are willing to circumvent any process just to secure electoral victory.
So let me start with that. I mean, you have talked about, whether the issue of collation, is it a technical problem or a political problem? I think you've since come to the conclusion that this is a political problem, and you've talked about captured institutions. So I'm wondering, when you think about the current situation, I mean, where we currently are, we still have the Ondo elections to conduct, and we still have people who are looking, to this democracy. They've been looking at it. I mean, I had cause to, talk about 25 years of democracy. Very soon we'll be celebrating October 1. And whether or not we like it, democracy will be at the heart of it again, at the heart of our discussions. Looking at what is currently happening as to whether this is really, will I say, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and hearing phrases such as do or die, what implications does it have for our democracy going forward?
I think if you check the Afrobarometer data, it says that 70% of Nigerians clamor for democracy. I think democracy is not the problem. The problem is the kind of democracy that we practice. It's the people who are driving this democracy, because they've got this mentality that their survival is dependent on how they're able to control political power. And that needs to change. That their attitude towards politics needs to change. That political power, or let's begin. You see, legitimacy comes from the people. If the people don't trust you well enough to vest in you decision-making powers on their behalf, do not force yourself on them. And that's why, we need to look at our laws. And when there's this rhetoric that it's a do or die affair, I think as a country we need to rise to condemn people who make those kinds of statements, because if the people don't want you, don't force yourself on people. Is this attempt to force, ourselves on people that has resulted into the kind of violence that we have seen repeatedly?
You've since said this was a clash of personalities in this Edo election.
Absolutely, it was really.
Certainly, it was about.
Because they deprived the people the opportunity to ask them critical questions, right? Debates, I think 1 or 2 debates was conducted. Not all the candidates, at least the main candidates, featured in those debates. And it's this disdain and arrogance that political actors have, and they don't respect the people, right? And that's why they have the effrontery to buy votes for as high as 10,000 naira, per vote, because they don't, in essence, actually regard we as a people. And I think that we need to get to a point where we begin to punish political parties for, one, fielding candidates who do not respect the rules of the game, who want to win elections at all costs, but also people or parties that target compromising the choice that they make. And we've got reforms, that are ongoing at the National Assembly. And I think that, even though the Peace Committee, plays a critical role, we need to look at how do we properly institutionalize the Peace Committee to have certain force of law. Because if you look at the accord that parties sign, most of them derive from the Electoral Act. Some of the offenses, in the Electoral Act, can be benchmarked, by the commitments that they made. So when politicians make those commitments, can we hold them to those commitments? Can our institutions rise to the occasion to hold these political actors to account? These are the conversations. But at the end of the day, Maupe, if the personal integrity of those who are involved in this is not fixed, we're still going to deal with this problem. Because you can have technology you can have IREV, you can have BVAS. But if we as a people don't really have this conversation and consensus that what we want is an election that truly reflects our will and not one that is subject to the whims and caprices of politicians, then we're not going to make any headway.
I listened to the statement of the Labour Party candidate, who obviously was, quite miffed with what happened on that day. His statement was quite strong. He says that it was a transaction. It was not an election. He condemns both the both the PDP and the APC for what he terms a show of shame. And he had pretty strong words. He says it was a bidding war for the votes of Edo people. It was not a fair fight, so to speak. I don't know if you've taken it, but he also says that what he offers the people of Edo State who, let their votes be bought is not condemnation. He says what he offers is sympathy. The environment in which the elections were being held, many analysts already foretold that this issue of vote buying was going to be at the forefront. Do you really take issue with it?
I do, fundamentally, and on grounds of principle. Because what elections signify is an opportunity where people exercise free choice. Free choice is an integral part of democracy. Now, when you compromise that choice, it defeats the essence of democracy. This weaponization of poverty, that's manifested through procuring votes, questions the legitimacy of electoral outcomes. And we say this to people all the time in our citizens' engagement. When you sell your vote, you lose the right to ask any leader that emerges out of that process critical question because they've already bought your voice. And the reason why politicians are buying votes is because they know votes are beginning to count. And one way to compromise that choice is to buy the votes, because somehow, even though now we're seeing this resurfacing, we're seeing, old tactics of election malpractices, resurfacing in our electoral process. But then politicians are buying votes because they know votes actually count. And we need to urge, the best antidote to vote buying is that government should deliver the promise of welfare and security to the people. Because that's the reason why people vote in the first place. People vote at elections because they want leaders that can solve leadership problems. They want leaders that can make their lives better. If you don't deal with that, you'll continually have this situation where people sell their votes at elections. So that's my position. And I think that our laws also need to change, because the Electoral Act only talks about bribery and conspiracy, but it's not explicitly stated in our law books. And I urge, the lawmakers who are politicians, who in most cases, are also part of this entire problem, to have a rethink about their own political future. Because political legitimacy is derived from the people when they make free choices. If that choice is compromised, then the outcome is compromised.
Two questions in one. Yourself, that's the Yaga Africa, your group, and a host of other civil societies are already asking for new reforms. I think you released a document a few days ago. What are the key instruments you're asking for in that document? And what are your projections for the future of our democracy if we continue in this trajectory?
There are 37 recommendations for constitution review and electoral act, but I'll just say three things. That, Maobe and fellow Nigerians, it's time to recapture INEC. And the only way to recapture INEC is the National Assembly, in its constitution review, is to do as Justice Wade said, remove the power of appointing the INEC chairman, the national commissioners, the resident electoral commissioners from the executive. That's one. Two.
And give it to who?
No. Justice Wade said give it to the NJC, right? Now, we are proposing something else. That yes, you can have an interagency committee that comprises National Assembly, NJC, that also has a diverse group. So people who want the job can apply for the job. They go through screening, and also go through confirmation from the National Assembly.
That's the first one.
That's the first one. The second one deals with the discipline of INEC resident electoral commissioners. Today, if a resident electoral commissioner defaults at the state, the INEC headquarters cannot sanction him because they are not the appointing authority. We need to bring that control into INEC. The third one deals with electronic transmission of results. If you had electronic transmission of results as part of the collation process, and let me be clear, I'm not saying electronic transmission should substitute the manual process. Just like the Supreme Court held that IREV is not part of the collation system, it's for public viewing. We need to legislate so that electronic transmission is integrated into the collation so that both the manual and the electronic process go hand in hand, so that when results are uploaded on IREV, they have some legality.
Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa, thank you so much for coming on Hard Copy.
Thanks, always a delight.
Well, that's the program tonight, but it's never over until we've heard from you. So please send us your thoughts using the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Good night.